I want to begin by saying a few words, and when you hear these words, think about what comes to your mind. Haiti, tsunami, Oklahoma City, those are all words that bring to mind disaster. Earthquake in Haiti, the bombing in Oklahoma City, the devastating tsunami, 2004. We could name other words as well that would bring to mind some vision of disaster. It depends on where you live. In Texas, if you know Texas history, Galveston would be a word. Or New London would be another, where a natural gas explosion in a school there took the lives of several hundred. Yeah, all of these disasters are permeated with the questions surrounding them. One of those is the question, why? In our text for today, there are disasters that come to mind as Jesus is talking with a group of people. They bring up one. Apparently Pilate had killed some Galileans while they were making sacrifice, while they were worshiping. A terrible thing that he did. He was a cruel tyrant. And the question that they seem to have as they share this with Jesus is, why did this happen? Was it because they were less righteous than anyone else that this befell them, this terrible tragedy? So Jesus asks and answers the question, no. I tell you no. And he says, Jesus does, and there's that tower that fell, killed 18 people. Everybody knew about it. Everybody talked about it. Were those people less righteous than anyone else? I tell you no, Jesus said. But there is that persistent question, isn't there, of why in all of these situations and countless thousands of others. Why is a human question. It is a question we ask, that we must ask, just like we must quench our thirst, or we must eat in order to stave off our feelings of hunger. We must ask the question, why? Because we need to know. I was reading about a study of children. It was a British study that was done last year in 2013 that said that young children ask on average a question every 2 minutes, 56 seconds. Do you believe that? I do. In fact, they said that the most prolific questioners are 4-year-old girls who ask 390 questions a day. And do you know what the main question is? You know what it is. It starts with one word, why? And some of those are tough. Why is the sky blue? Why is water wet? I mean, on and on. And you answer one of those why questions and it leads to what? Another why question. And it just can go on and on because that's how we learn. We question. And we want to know why. Why are things the way they are and they're not some other way? Why did this happen? And it's a really, really important question in so many ways. And it's one that we must ask. And in asking it, so often leads to profound knowledge. It leads to solutions to problems. The why question is a really important question. But sometimes the why question can jump the tracks. It can get off track. And it's generally when we ask why God did this or that. And so often that question comes from the mistaken notion that if you're good and if you're righteous and if you try to do the right things and you try to live a good life, that God will protect you from anything bad and that good things will happen to you. And we know that's not true, but we tend to think in that way and we talk in that way sometimes, don't we? Something good happens, something really lucky out of the blue happens, and what do we say to someone? You must be living right. Well, their living right has nothing whatsoever to do with it. It just happened. But we tend to want to go in that direction because we need to understand what causes everything. And so often, we point to God as the cause. And we point to God as the cause of that which happens to us that is unfortunate or that is even tragic. And very quickly we begin to think, what did I do to deserve this? But all we have to do is open the pages of Scripture to see that that just cannot be true. It just can't be. I mean, we know that, don't we, if we really think about it, related to our own experience. But open the pages of Scripture and you find in there person after person after person who is seeking to do the right thing, to live a good life, to follow faithfully, and tragedy and misfortune and heartache and difficulty comes upon them anyway. The Psalms are full of these emotions, crying out to God about that which is happening in the life of the person who is seeking to be faithful. Or you look at characters in the Bible like Joseph. Joseph, who is sold into slavery by his brothers. And yet Joseph, as he grows up, leads a life that is exemplary in faithfulness and extends graciousness to others. But he had misfortune. Or Moses. Moses, who led the people out of slavery in Egypt. Moses would become so dejected sometimes that he would ask that God would just take his life. It was difficult. The prophets suffered as they sought to be faithful in delivering to their own situation and their own people the message that God had for them in that place and time. And then, of course, you turn to the pages of the New Testament and you find there, of course, at the very center of the story is the story of a man completely righteous, the Son of God, who is crucified, put to death, suffers. The Apostle Paul, seeking to follow Christ, can outline in list form, and he does, all of the things that happened to him, all of the misfortunes, shipwrecks and beatings and imprisonment, on and on and on. Top of it all, Paul had this thorn in the flesh that tormented him. I mean, it was difficult for Paul. And down through the ages and into this very time and place are the same kinds of stories. So we know it's not true what Job's friends said to Job when Job was suffering, and they said, "Oh, you did something to deserve this, Job. This is your fault. You sinned. You brought this on yourself in some way." But people tend to go there, don't they? Well, we know that's not true. And we also know that when we're asking that why question and we're pointing to God at the one who causes suffering, that can't be true either. And yet we do that, and sometimes we do it quite unintentionally, quite without thinking about it, without thinking through what we say. Because we sometimes say things like, this is part of God's plan, or this must be God's will. And we try to say that, I think, most times. People are trying to be helpful in some way. But I remember very well a young woman who became a member of the first full-time church that I served out of seminary. She'd been a member of another congregation when her only child was born. And when the child was 8 days old, something terrible happened. In her little brain, there was a massive aneurysm. And it destroyed everything but essentially the brain stem, that which was required simply to carry on physical life. This was 8 years later now. Of course, in a wheelchair, unresponsive to anything but the most basic physical stimuli. It was terrible. She came to a Bible study, and in all of my ministry, no one has ever asked harder questions than that mother asked. She'd been out of the church for some years because when that terrible thing happened to her, there were friends in that church who said, "This is God's will. This is part of God's plan." She couldn't accept that. Who could? Who could believe that about God? And on top of it, there were even those who said, there must be some sin in your life that caused this. You've done something that brought this about. I was amazed when she shared that story that that Job's friends were still among us in that way. But I guess they are. Because what we're saying when we say that a tragedy is God's will or it's part of God's plan is that God did it. God caused it. And people will do that. They will talk, someone is hit by a drunk driver. Well, it's God's will. Really? Do you mean to say that God caused that person to drink, to become intoxicated, to get in the car and to drive the car and cause that terrible tragedy? No, that can't be. It can't be. Or a terrible tragedy happens perpetrated on purpose by someone. Let's say a sexual assault and a murder, about the worst thing we can imagine. Who could say that's part of God's plan? Did God put it in the mind and the heart of that perpetrator to do that evil deed? No. We know that cannot be the case. And if it were the case, think about what life would be like. Why wear a safety belt? Why seek medical treatment? I mean, if it's just all planned out in advance, you're going to die anyway, or you're going to get well anyway, so why do anything? Why have doctors? Why have engineers who work out problems to make things safer? You see? So this question of why can lead us, sometimes we can mentally jump the track and go to a place that doesn't make sense, and that even slanders the name of God. It even breaks the third commandment. You shall not take the Lord's name in vain, that is, for nothing. Don't use God's name for nonsense. And sometimes people do. Well, we know the answer to a lot of those why questions. We know what causes earthquakes. We know plate tectonics. We understand that. We know quite often in the wake of an accident what caused it. So the why question can serve us so well in making things better. We know why people don't have enough food and are starving. We know that it's a matter of distribution. We know that it's a matter of farming practices. There are all sorts of reasons for that. And that why question can lead us to provide answers and leads us to that question that we must move to, and that is, what now? I mean, after the tragedy happens, or when the difficult stance is in front of us, what now? What do we do now? 30,000 people a day die of starvation. In the face of that, what is our responsibility? Why does it happen? That's an important question. and it can lead us to the solutions. But what now is the question that challenges us? And it's that question that Jesus moves his listeners to that day in a very startling way, as Jesus often does, in a shocking way, in a way that's hyperbole, as Jesus often does. It's like when Jesus said, if your hand offends you, cut it off. If your eye offends you, pluck it out. He didn't intend for anyone to do that. He just wanted to make the point and make it clear. In this instance, what he says to his listeners is, you're looking at those people wondering about their righteousness and how they're living and whether that brought on this disaster. But of course it didn't bring on that disaster. But let me tell you, if you don't get with it, you'll die just like they did. That's a shocking statement when he just said that the way we live or our own righteousness doesn't lead to those things. What is he saying? He is saying the question in the face of that is, what is my responsibility here? And that really is in many ways a more difficult question. What is our responsibility in the way we live and the decisions we make and what we do with our resources when it comes to the tragedies that befall people? Or when it becomes to the ongoing tragedies of hunger or rampant illness like the Ebola outbreak? Why is it happening? Well, we know how Ebola is spread. So the question is, what now? And so many people are giving of themselves to deal with that. You see? That what now question is so important. And then that third question is where? And that's the question we often ask. Where's God in all of this? Where's God in this? Where was God in the Haiti earthquake? God was right there with God's people in that situation. That's where God was. Where is God in my suffering? God is with me. Where is God in your suffering? God is with you. God is with us. We are not alone. We say it over and over again, providing us resources and strength that go beyond us. And as we work our way through the why and the what now questions, quite often out of tragedy and difficulty come good things, blessings, or improvements even. That terrible New London explosion. Do you know that's the reason why we have natural gas that has an odorant in it? It's because of that explosion. It's because of that tragedy. And countless thousands, maybe millions of lives have been saved because of that result. Did it happen for that reason? Of course not. Did it happen on purpose? No. But did something good come from it? Yes, it did. And there are instances over and over again of parents and of family members who have had some tragedy happen in their lives, and they wrestled with that why question, but they also wrestled with the what now question, and they came out of it saying, I'm going to do something to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. Or I'm going to get busy and make life better for those who are suffering the same thing. Or I'm going to share out of my own experience to comfort and bring peace and hope to someone else. God works through people. And God is present in the hands that help. God is present in the knowledge that people bring to help others. God is present in the lives of all the people who are suffering. God is with us. We are not alone. The Apostle Paul learned that when he dealt with that thorn in the flesh I mentioned earlier. He prayed that that thorn in the flesh, very painful, whatever it was, difficult for Paul. It was a burden that he was bearing in his life. We don't know what it was, maybe some kind of eye condition, but it was painful. And he prayed over and over again that it would be taken from him, and as far as we know, it never was. But the answer he received, he said, was, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And so in that terrible situation, a situation that Paul had, he didn't deserve that. He didn't do something that brought that on himself. What he had as the answer to his prayer was the strength, the courage, the presence of God to bring him peace, to get him through it and sustain him along the way. I'll close with this. In the aftermath of the Haiti disaster, there were two men who were trapped in the hotel in Port-au-Prince that collapsed. Sam Dixon and Clint Rabb. Sam and Clint were part of UMCOR, the United Methodist Committee on Relief. They arrived at the hotel 5 minutes before the earthquake hit. They arrived there for a meeting. They were planning how to respond to the poverty in Haiti. There's some new initiatives they were doing. There had been a hurricane that had done a lot of damage. They were still recovering from that, and so UMCOR was still there. And they were meeting at this hotel with some local folks to make plans. 5 minutes before the earthquake, they got there. They were trapped for 55 hours. Sam died. Clint survived long enough to tell the story, but he later died a few days later in Florida because the injuries sustained were so massive. What happened during those 55 hours, and where was God? Clint Rabb would say over and over again, God was right there with them. They knew the presence of God. God gave them the strength to endure. They shared life with one another. They talked about their families. They told jokes. They did all the kinds of things that anyone would do in passing the time like that. They prayed together. They recited scriptures that they had memorized and could remember. But the most important thing is Clint Rabb would say, we were not alone. God was with us. Thanks be to God for that. When we go from this place, we will go and we will have lots of why questions. But may we also have the what now questions. And may we also answer the where question with the sure knowledge that we are not alone. God is with us, giving us what we need in every situation. Amen.